This episode of WDW Today is being sponsored by All Star Vacation Homes. And, with lots of choices of where to stay at Walt Disney World, it's kind of a hard decision to make. I mean, there's so many different options, on-site, off-site. There's deals all over the place. You might say to yourself, where should I stay? But what's a great value? There's no arguing with a great value, right? It's All Star Vacation Homes. They're going to give you lots of space, lots of great amenities, close to the parks. And the best part, it's going to be a fraction of the price of trying to get something similar on Walt Disney World property. That's how great of a deal it is. Just go to www.allstarvacationhomes.com. Check out what they see over there. I bet you're going to like what you see.
Bringing the world to your world, this is Walt Disney World Today. Here are Mike Scopa, Len Testa, Mike Newell, and your host, Matt Hochberg.
It's Friday, March 11th, 2011, and this is episode 849 of WDW Today. I'm Matt Hochberg of StudioCentral.com. Joining me on today's show is Len Testa, co-author of The Unofficial Guide to Walt Disney World. And Len, people always say beware the Ides of March, but really, what's the worst that's ever happened on March 11th, right?
What could possibly go wrong? Just don't eat any Greek food today.
I'm just saying, there was that guy that Scopa once knew that something happened to him. We never hear from him again, but...
That's exactly it. And, one bad apple spoils the whole lot.
Exactly.
Like
yeah, but he got a salad named after him.
Romaine?
It's better than that chimichanga guy I once knew.
John Chimichanga?
John Chimichanga. What a great guy. Also joining us on today's show is Mike Scopa, a senior feature writer and blogger for allears.net. Welcome, Mike.
Flash photography? I wouldn't. It alters the homing signal, and that's not good.
Dinosaur.
That's favorite.
I love it. Also joining us on today's show is our special guest, Chad Emerson, author of 4 Decades of Magic, celebrating the first 40 years of Disney World. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thanks. It's great to be back with
Excuse me. I was told that the 40 Years of Magic referred to my biography. Matt, I know I haven't been on many shows recently, but I definitely need to talk about this.
We'll have the lawyers look into it.
All right, fair enough. Well, let's continue that since Chad's here. What the heck?
And I'm a lawyer, so.
Hey, Chad.
Yeah.
Chad, I need some advice.
Let's talk after the show.
Maybe an awkward conversation, but go ahead.
And to be clear, Matt, I want to preface by saying we put the compiler because the authors are over 20 great Disney writers, and all I did is write the introduction and put the essays together. So I don't want to lay credit for the book. There's about 22 different people that deserve credit.
Well, you got to take it up with Amazon.com. They list you as the author.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah. So
that's the official source.
Yeah.
The internet is never wrong, Chad.
That's right. Nothing ever wrong is ever. It's written on the internet, must be true. And we're having Chad on to talk about not only the book that he didn't author, he just wrote a foreword to, but talk about talk with Chad and what his research into the book, as well as also talking about the 40th anniversary of Walt Disney World, which is going to be occurring this year, 2011. Of course, that'll be happening in October of this year officially. So, Chad, let's talk first about the book, 4 Decades of Magic, and tell us a little bit about your involvement in the book and what spawned this whole idea exactly.
Well, a year ago, I wrote a book called Project Future, which kind of told the story of from, say, 1959 to 1966, all the way up to 71 when it opened. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty well received. To do that, I started my own publishing company called I4 Publishing, which is actually a kind of a nod to the I4 Corporation, which was one of the dummy corporations Disney used to purchase some of the Central Florida land.
Oh, I thought it was a reference to that awful highway, but I was like, well,
I think it is because when Disney created all those dummy corporations, one of them was AYEFOUR. That's the name of our company too, but it was a nod to I4. Because at that time, one of the reasons Disney selected Orlando as opposed to Ocala was that I-4 was going straight through Orlando. And so that book was pretty successful. And then we published a book by Jim Korkis, Vault of Walt, which was really successful. And a couple of people said, how about doing a compilation with the 40th coming up? And recently it seems like Disney World hasn't paid as much attention to anniversaries like the 25th of Epcot as they have in the past. So we decided to put this book together. We sent out a bunch of emails and some of the leading Disney experts, like Mike, responded and said, yeah. And a lot of people had things they were doing, but we got 20 of the greatest Disney writers, commentators, podcasters together, and now we have these essays.
Yeah, I think my letter got lost in the mail.
Yeah. Well, I know I emailed a bunch of you all. So.
Yeah, it must have gotten lost in the internet again.
Yeah. What was that lawsuit we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I don't know, Chad.
Well, actually, the truth being told, we tried to even it out, so we couldn't have the whole WDW Today team on the single one. So Mike was your official representative. Does that work?
We'll go for that. We'll take it.
Okay,
sure. Okay.
Lynn's written so many books. Lynn's already been all over the book, so I mean, we don't need.
So, Chad, let's talk about who is in the book, who else you selected over perhaps some better choices, but that's not the point. Tell us about who made the book besides Mike, and talk about a little bit about what's included in here, because this is a collection of essays, which is interesting. It's not just a straight book Chad wrote. So tell us a little bit about what the book entails exactly.
Yeah, what we decided to do at I4 was to get together, rather than find one or two people to tell the story of the 40th anniversary, and we had a couple opportunities to do that with some real experienced Disney veterans, but we thought, you know what, we bet people will like to hear 20 or so different voices, because every writer has a different style, has a different angle. And so we sent out these, and the people that responded, some topics, for example, Hoop-Dee-Doo Review, ended up getting 2 essays, but completely different takes on those. But then some articles we found, all of them were completely original. Some were about Epcot and those, but then there were some of these about the things that were never built. Like Lou Mongello wrote an essay about resorts that were never built, or Scott and Carol Holmes wrote about Beastly Kingdom that was never built. And then we had some cool essays involving not necessarily attractions or hotels, but storylines from the past 40 years. And one was by a writer named Fox Nolte, often referred to as Fox Fur in the Disney online community. And this person wrote an article that talked about the alleged haunting of Pirates of the Caribbean. And
yeah. What I've heard the story. What was it? Sam?
His name's George. And if you don't say goodnight to George, if you're the last person leaving the building, then George will be displeased, and the next day will cause all types of problems. So it was that ghost story as well as some other stories, which when I was reading that, I actually found myself I haven't been on Pirates of the Caribbean since then, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to go, because some of the stories which Fox Nolte shares as someone who worked on that attraction, it sounds like they might be true after all.
Well, let's since we do have one of the authors one of the essayists, I should say, on the show with us besides Chad, Mr. Scopa, why don't you give our listeners a preview of what you compiled for the book?
Well, if anyone who is listening who had attended one of Fred Block's Magic Meets, there was one several years ago. I did the keynote speech, and I talked about the Carousel of Progress, and I talked about how it developed, and it was part of the 1964 World's Fair. And I talked about the character, the main character, the father figure who is on stage for all of the dioramas. But one of the things I did not talk about was how the idea, the concept of the Carousel of Progress first came to Walt Disney, and why it took so long for it to develop. And so what I wanted to do with this essay, and Chad, I'm very humbled by your asking me to be part of this. What I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of go from point A to point C and talk about how it all started, what delayed the construction of the Carousel of Progress, how it all came to be planned, and then I take everyone through that special journey with a special family. And it's one of those stories that has always been something that I've always marveled at, and it represents to me what Disney Magic is all about, and how it exemplifies that there are all kinds of stories that have been generated over the past 40 years, and this is just one that needed to be told.
Let me chime in too, because Mike's essay really shows why we decided to have all these different voices, because you have great details. Jason Diffendale with WW Celebrations wrote, which is probably the most detailed thing on the monorail I've ever read, and if you want to know every spec of every car, it's got that detail, so it appeals to that type of reader. But when I read Mike's email about the Elizabeth Meyer family, it was a real life tearjerker. And so this book, you can go from great detail to, and I really want to commend Mike, because how he tracked down that story, that really brings the humanity of the last 40 years to life, and how all these great attractions are important. But probably the most compelling storyline from the last 40 years is how it has affected the real life people. And this is just a perfect example. Kudos to Mike for it.
Well, let's kind of take a step back here with the 40th anniversary, obviously the purpose of this book. And Chad, you kind of hinted upon this a little earlier in the show, saying that Disney's not as big on the celebrations anymore. And I mean, what's everyone's take on that? Because very early on in Disney's history, they loved to celebrate celebrations. They were big. Obviously, the most famous one being that 25th anniversary with the huge birthday cake. It's Castle, which was awful. It was a huge debacle, but people remember it, so for whatever it's worth.
So like the Hindenburg, it was,
Fair enough. All right,
the same thing for large cake-like structures too.
Fair enough. So, Len, what's your take on Disney? I mean, I guess not celebrating the anniversary. They have released a fair amount of merchandise, but outside of that, we haven't no events or special anything really happening. So, at least at this juncture, we should say, at this date. So, what's your take on that, Len?
I think they've made a conscious decision not to do this because they don't want young kids to think that the park is old. So imagine they do like a 40th or a 50th or a 60th, birthday. That's old to a lot of people, and that's why they're not doing the anniversaries. They don't want to play up the fact that parts of the things that you see when you walk into the park are 3 generations old. To me, I kind of get it and I kind of understand it. Although, from my perspective, the way that you keep the park fresh for young kids is by constantly introducing new rides and new experiences, not by running from your past. I think a low key sort of celebration would still be nice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I would love to see them do something more so than just merchandise.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I kind of trace it back to. And they are. I think D23 is doing an event which is based on the 40th anniversary in late May. So they are giving some nod to that. But I think you can
with
trace
an extra cost, of course.
Yeah, with an extra. Yeah. But I think you trace a little bit back to 5 or 6, well, maybe a little more than that now, when they kind of consolidated all of the domestic parks into Disney Parks singular. And since then, they did the 50th out at Disneyland. But the 25th at Epcot and this 40th and most of the other ones, I think they've tried to, for whatever reason, I disagree with the strategy pretty strongly, but they've tried to avoid emphasizing single parks and single resorts and rather just take the entire Disney Parks brand and cross a marketing campaign that clears everything. And so we don't get these weird results where Disneyland is gifting Disney World for celebrations and anniversaries. But yeah, it's a real shame because 40 years, that's an important birthday, just like 25 at Epcot was. And as someone who's turning 39 this year, I feel like and a lot of us are around that age, I feel like I grew up with Disney. It's been alive as long as I have. And I think a lot of people would really buy into the nostalgia side of things. For whatever reason, I guess they don't think the money's there to generate nostalgia. But I agree with Lynn. It's too bad because they could keep the park fresh by also recognizing its past at the same time.
Yeah. What's your take on it, Scobo? How do you see the anniversaries being celebrated or not celebrated in this case?
Well, a couple things. I think that whoever made the decision looked at a few things. And again, we don't know if something is going to happen. I would guess that if anything's going to happen, we'll probably hear about it within the next 90 days. But I think that possibly maybe the 40th sort of contradicts what Chad said, but again, it's just my opinion. Maybe they feel that a 10th year anniversary, a 25th anniversary, a 50th year anniversary is the way to go, and these interim birthdays, so to speak, are not worth the effort. So I'm thinking that might be one reason. The other reason is that I think that maybe when they had gone through the celebrations that we've seen over the past 40 years, they try to outdo themselves every time. And after a while, that becomes very, very tiring to come up with something that's bigger and better than the last celebration. And with that comes the writing of a larger check to do the promotion, to do the marketing, to produce all the merchandise. And perhaps the return on the investment has not been what they had expected over the past several times. And you put that all together, and maybe it just was too much of an argument against doing it. So I'm guessing that's one of those three, or maybe a combination of all three, that has contributed to this. But again, I'm guessing that sometime between now and sometime in early June, we'll probably know for sure if anything's going to happen. And again, it's the 40th anniversary of the Magic Kingdom only, really. So.
Right. Well, let's ask this question then. Chad, I guess we'll start with you. 40 years have passed since the Magic Kingdom opened. Quite a bit has happened, not only in the Magic Kingdom, but also throughout Walt Disney World in those 40 years. So what would be, in your opinion, what is the single biggest thing to happen to Walt Disney World in those 40 years?
Epcot.
Really? What do you say?
Ooh, really? That's interesting. Go ahead.
Well, it was the most outside of the mold. It was the biggest risk they took. Magic Kingdom, to a large degree, was a sequel of Disneyland. They knew what they were doing. It was on a grander scale, more property. They are adding hotels at the very beginning. But with Epcot, you could just see the chronology. They just struggled for about 10 years trying to decide how they were going to put this together. And they went with Future World, World Showcase, neither, both, and all these different moves. And finally, I think they just decided they have to do something. There was so much political pressure in Florida based on the assurances that they were going to build an Epcot, whether that was going to be a city or something else. And so when they did that, I think there was no model, not just in the country, but in the world. I mean, with the Studios Park, there was Universal going the same time, and studio backstage tours, and Animal Kingdom, you'd had Busch Gardens doing animal parks, and they're not all exactly the same. And even with Downtown Disney and these other, but when you look at Epcot, they were creating something that had never been done in their history of the world of amusement worlds. And so I think that was the biggest risk, and it worked.
What about you, Skipper? What do you think?
No, I agree 100. I agree 1,000% with what Chad said, because when you think about it, Epcot was the first Disney theme park that sold alcohol. Epcot was a risk. Was it John Hench and Marty Sklar who pushed the two models together? Is that how the story goes?
And Marv Davis was involved too.
Yeah. So that was, and I think, Len, you've even, I think you may have found somewhere someone has declared Epcot the most perfectly engineered theme park in the world. And think about it. It's been around since '82. And has there been another theme park that has been able to rival what Epcot has brought? I mean, it brings cultures together. It brings all types of cuisines together, although that might be a stretch when we're talking about the restaurants in Epcot. But it brings a lot of people together for illuminations at night. There's so many things, interventions, it's technology, as well as the old world cultures. It just blends everything. And again, nobody's been able to improve upon that model, really.
There haven't been many theme parks of that size or that scope in terms of imagination. Built around the world. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that anyone's done that's comparable to Epcot.
But you think about it.
It was their statement, right? It was their statement that said, just look what we can do.
Think about the Magic Kingdom. Think about Studios. Think about Animal Kingdom. And then think about Epcot. Epcot handles crowds better. Epcot just they just have figured out how to make everything work very smoothly in Epcot. Yep. From the way they stagger Future World and World Showcase up to how they have evolved with Reflections of Earth. I mean, it's just perfect. And then you think about over the years how they've made that the showcase for Flower and Garden, how they've made it the showcase for Food and Wine, and it's like they really know. I mean, you can. I'm sure that there are many things that you can criticize about the Walt Disney Company. Well, they did this, they did that. But boy, when it comes to Epcot, they get an A+.
Well, what about? I mean, here's the other side of the story with Epcot. I mean, yeah, they did all that in 1982, but Epcot today certainly is nothing like Epcot of 1982. They if anything, they've spent the last 15, 20 years trying to undo all that and make Epcot more like all the other parks. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, I think
They've introduced characters. They've taken away those iconic attractions that were in the original vision and replaced them with Finding Nemo and Soarin' and attractions that have nothing to do. They've done everything possible to erase the 1982 Epcot and replace it with what we commonly see in theme parks and certainly in the other three parks.
I think one of the things that jumps out to me about Epcot is that I think the current leadership, and I've been real fortunate to get to know Dan Cockrell, mainly through his dad, but also know Dan individually. I think they recognize, and Jim McPhee before him. Jim started off in the parking lot of Epcot, I think. I think they are looking back and they realized Epcot kind of got away from that, but it started with the wand. They took down the wand, and they've tried to do some other things. Now, is there a balance? Yes, but I was real fortunate last year to go to Tokyo Disney Seas, which is the perfect theme park. If you're going to pick out a perfect 10, that is the perfect theme park, except that when you even compare it to Epcot, it is still somewhat of the conventional layout of a theme park in different lands. And how Epcot can take a thing called Future World and World Showcase, which really, you can think of a storyline that weaves them together, but it's a manufactured storyline. And so you take those two, but it's seamless almost. I don't know. It feels seamless. Maybe we're just so used to it. But even back when I remember going the first year, it just felt seamless. And I think it's like when you take two. It's like salty and sweet. You take these two flavors, which are completely different, and they fit together though, just in a weird way. And I think that's really, while they've tried to introduce some changes. I also think that Illuminations is the perfect example of everything Epcot represented in 1982. It is, in my opinion, the perfect Disney attraction. And so they've known not to tinker with that, even though it's over 10 years old now.
Yeah, it's World Showcase is the peanut butter and Future World is the chocolate.
Very good. Well, of course, you can check out, it's not Chad's, I don't know, the book that Chad has a hand in.
I4 Publishers book.
4 Decades of Magic, celebrating the first 40 years of Disney World, and that's on. It's available now. You can go to Amazon or any of your favorite places to find books. Not Borders anymore, but anywhere else that you'd like to find them. And Chad, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us, and look forward to checking out the book.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
And of course, this episode of WDW Today is being sponsored by All Star Vacation Homes. And 40 years ago, there wasn't All Star Vacation Homes, unfortunately. But the great news is, in the 40 years since Disney World opened over here in the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, we've seen a lot of stuff coming our way. And certainly one of the benefits has been All Star Vacation Homes. Lots of great places for you to stay with tons of great amenities. You really have to see how much different options you can choose from. You can really custom tailor the house you want to stay at to fit your family. If you want themed rooms for the kids that have different characters and paint and really cool thing. I mean, this is very, very nicely decorated. There's no better choice than All-Star Vacation Homes. Check them out right now at www.allstarvacationhomes.com. We want to remind all of our listeners that our next live show is on March 27th at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time with special guest AJ Wolf from DisneyFoodBlog.com. It's March 27th. Check you out then. More details at WDWToday.com. For Len Testa, Mike Scopa, Mike Newell, and Chad Emerson, I'm Matt Hochberg. We'll see you on the next show.
Stupid Judy, stupid energy.
This has been a production of Mouse World Radio.